What I did was I talked to 40 heads of learning and development and heads of human resources around the world, institutions that are known to Fitch and that are engaged in this topic. They collectively managed around 500,000 employees in terms of their responsibility of professional development and HR. So a very representative audience that they were expressing their views on. And they had about 17 so years of experience on average. And it wasn't that there was one guy that worked for 45 years or something. It was actually interesting. Most of the people were at the peak of their careers, peak of their leadership, and the peak of the question, which was, what can we do more so that the next 10 years of our industry are going to be as good as, or if not better, than where we are today? They were very frank about what they felt needed to be done, and I was very frank with them about what I felt we should try to get across. There's a Chinese proverb which says, what's the best time to plant a tree? And the answer to that is 10 years ago. And what's the second best time? It's today. And what came across from all of the interviews was, we have some challenges with the way in which we approach professional development, no question. We've perhaps overseen an industry that's perhaps neglected embracing of the new developments in learning and development, but we better get on with it now. And we were talking about all sorts of things around how do we cope with quality over quantity, how do we cope with agile working versus static, what is the sort of the issues that face in the industry between being a transformative business model versus just a traditional business model in certain parts of the financial services sector. How do we address this with the type of people that will lead our business into the future? And that was really crucial. And who do we work with alongside that? Do we build everything from within, which used to be the sort of the attitude of most large institutions, to a world where we have to embrace an ecosystem? And there were questions all the way through about that. The big finding is this. Essentially, we are clearly going through a change. And there's a really interesting statistic that came through from the interviews. But the change is around, what is that leadership stand for? What is it that we want people to do for our business? What do we want them to do in the wider context of our industry? And then crucially, which was coming across a lot, is what do we want to do in society? With the global financial crisis, our industry was clearly put into question. Our conduct, our actions, our people. And the workforce has addressed that over the last 10 years, which is why I use the proverb. But now, the heads of human resources and learning and development are beginning to make the argument even stronger about what do we want to do to never let that happen again, and it's all about the people. Things are pressing us in terms of competition, in terms of technology, but society too. People expect us to do more. And more importantly, as Andreas said, is for new talent coming to the space, we have to provide them with a space in which they can develop, and they can see this as a better space to develop than in the past, but also relative to other industries that they may also equally be able to attend and go to. 1/3 of those that I interviewed, of the 40 institutions, said that in the last 12 months, they had actually gone through a complete review of the attributes that they wanted in future leaders and future top-tier talent. Another 20% had said that they are doing it now. So this year, it's kind of highest in their priorities. Now, clearly, we've always gone through an attribute development process, and it happens probably every 3 to 5 years. But it was a very specific statement, which is we are fundamentally reviewing what it is that we want people to be in our businesses going forward. We've gone from a world where in the past it was, we want people to follow the orders. We want people to be procedural. We want people to have a compliancy. We want people to follow the rules, particularly after the GFC, where, for some extent, yes, we needed to make sure that we were compliant with the process, and people that we had that ran the businesses fit within the rule book. It's not suggesting that we're going away from the rule book now, but we need people to move on. We need the business to grow and move into different areas. We need visionaries. We need people that are strategic. We also need people that have the stronger sense of ethics and purpose, a wider understanding of what our business contributes to the wider society. We also need people that are analytic, and so on. For example, communicators. Now, I put it back to a lot of them and said, look, come on, we always wanted these people. Surely, if I showed you this 10 years ago, this is exactly who you said you wanted to need. And I said, yes, I agree. But now we think about how we're going to train these people. What are the processes that we have to put in place to make that talent become effective leaders in our business? So there were 3 things that I thought would be useful to share from the work as a result of the quotes and the structure that I've just outlined to you. I'm going to give you some sense of the learning methods that people are beginning to look at. Not all of them are in play. Some of them are wishful thinking, and there's a timeline to which they'll achieve it. But certainly, there's an acceptance that we have to think perhaps differently around how we teach and instruct and develop. The next one is crucial, which is the assessment of impact. We are in a digital age, and I'm going to share with you some thoughts around what people felt about what digital can mean from a data and a numbers perspective in terms of measuring the impact of professional development, which is critical. And then lastly, business commitment. I touched a little bit about the C-suite, or how they feel about it, or how they might be giving the impression of what they feel about learning and development. But also, what is the commitment more broadly when it comes to professional development? So as a result of listening to the 40 around the world, in broad terms, if you're thinking about a map of development, of what is the perfect world of L&D for the future, began to see that we've got to look at content development. What is our content going to be like? How good is it today? Is it fit for purpose? Is it going to be fit for training the future leaders that we want to have? High impact learning. How can we make learning as an experience better? How can we make it more valuable? How can we deliver against the results? Personalization was a piece that kept coming through. How do we make it so employees take ownership of the process? That they're attracted to join us because they can have a personalized map of their professional development, and that personalized map will stay with them. It's not in the induction interview. It stays with them throughout their entire career. And think about this, also it's potentially portable, so that they can go between institution to institution, accepting that people don't stay as long as they used to in a single firm. And that's often a frustration of the L&D programs that I was hearing. Then there's also peer-led development. How do we learn from each other? Setting the example, for instance. And clearly that also has a context to industry behavior. And then lastly, the business analytics. So those were the sort of, let's say, 5 areas of focus. And as I was going through that and listening to individuals, I mapped out, and I'm not going to walk through all of these, but I mapped out what was coming up as a sort of development field, whether it was in the first 24 months from today. And it started to resonate when you talk to CHROs. Well, would you like to develop, for example, in content development, how do you get hybrid solutions? How do you make hybrid learning a more effective way of teaching? For example, in personalization, how do we make the curriculum truly personalized? How do we embrace technology to do that when an individual comes on board? I talked a little bit earlier about experiential, but that also combines with augmented learning and even using technology for a better effect on the way that you teach people. As we went through, most of the CHROs I spoke to said, we don't really think too far ahead. We know we should, but we don't. We may get as far as 2 years, and that's actually pretty good. But in reality, they also knew that strategically, from a learning and development perspective, the people that you teach today are going to have real impact within 5 years. So there really should be at least a 5-year plan in place in terms of the types of modules and structures. So if we go further on into strategic developments of L&D, gamification. That came up a lot. And it was simplified as, well, this is something we can use technology for, but no. What was interesting that many of the leading firms, particularly a couple in Europe, were saying, no, gamification is about experience simulation, real-life classroom, but using content, material, technology to actually make the work experience come alive so you can observe and learn and monitor. And this is where we're taking it. There are examples of that in the past. Perhaps a decade ago, you had the trading floor, where people would simulate the trading floor experience in order to develop their own skills. But that's actually being exported into other parts of the financial services world as well. It isn't just about trading. And then the sort of big issues and game changers at the bottom, we do need to think about the data piece. Because it's all very well if we came back up to the C-suite and said, we want to build a gamification solution. We want to use augmented reality or virtual reality. We want to build a new content curriculum. We want modules all around the world. We want to travel. And well, that's great. But what is the impact? Where is the ROI? This is, I'm sure, what you hear all the time. How do I know that the X million pound budget per annum on workforce, or the £2,500, as one said, per employee, how do I know that's going to deliver me 2,501, 2, 3, 4? You don't know. But data will be able to help that. And crucially, the CHRs I spoke to said, we need to think more about that. We need to know how to track and monitor. They also needed to think about priorities, about which way they would build these modules, because different firms are evolutionary, and they're at different stages of the cycle of building L&D. But it was critical in the conversation that more and more of the CHROs and the heads of L&D were beginning to say, we have to shift from being responsive and tactical to strategic and pragmatic. And so it's a bit of a balance, and that's why I came back to saying it's a pivotal moment. By 2024, 60 to 70% of all talent development programs will be based on experiential learning. That involves simulations, cohort-based learning, similar to business school, case study assessments, role play, and gamification. Now, clearly, a lot of firms are already doing parts of that. But whether it's joined up, whether it goes across the piece, and whether it focuses on those attributes of future leadership rather than just a specific skill set, that's the game plan now. It's about how do we build the future top-tier talent. So the data piece is a big one. And it's not that I'd argue it's all about data, because it isn't. But it is all about showing the consequence of the effect of teaching and developing. What we have as a data story or accounting story today is very, very limited. We maybe know, if we have students and employees that come onto programs, their age. We maybe know what they're earning, but that's often quite difficult. That'll be on a different spreadsheet that you can't share in HR or blah, blah, blah. But we maybe know a little bit about their career plan. We may know their age or their gender, but we're not collecting that really as a strategic concept. We might just collect it for a particular course. But it's a good start. And the heads of development that I spoke to said, yeah, we've got that, but we're not really thinking about that in terms of consequences. But that's the first layer of KPI. Right, let's at least know who we teach, at the very basic. Okay, but as that goes further on, it's what about the consequences of those individuals? Where are they taking us? You know, what courses have they been on? How did they develop in those courses? What scores do they give to those courses? What do they think of the teachers on those courses? When they went back into the workplace, did they get promoted? How long did it take to get promoted? Did they achieve a specific business target that was set as part of the course program? Can we track those? Yes, we can. But we have to be more integrated into the business in order to be able to do that. But that's a second line of data. And that line of data, we know is within our gift to collect, but most institutions haven't even begun that from an L&D and HR perspective. It may be an MI, more broadly, business MI, but it's not being transferred across to HR. And as an outsider, I looked at it and thought, well, why aren't you even beginning to do this? Because then you've at least got the first two lines of data to begin to argue the impact of the effort of the investment that you make around the world to develop the talent. But then, there's the future line of data. And that's the correlation. That's the thinking around. And this is where quite a few, particularly the CHROs and heads of L&D that I spoke to in the States, some of the largest operators in terms of employment that we spoke to from around the world, we need to know the consequences. If we have an employee that's at a certain age, a certain salary, that goes through a certain series of programs, well, what is their learning propensity? What is the context of their learning propensity in terms of how good are they back in the workplace? What is the impact that they have on our business as a result? How does it reflect the rest of the way that they learn? Do we know that specific courses are better or worse? Can we evaluate that? Can we effectively resource manage? And all of that comes down to tracking the process of an individual. So I'm optimistic, because we have personalization mapping coming in, that we can say to an individual, here's your path, here's your programs, this is where we want you to be, and let's track you through the process so that we can have the proper analytics. The downside is at the moment, only 20% of the businesses that I spoke with, and these represented the largest institutions, had a resource commitment to data analytics today. We were still in that spreadsheet mindset. Having said that, it was a recognition that this is something that we need to do over the next 2 to 5 years. We need to invest in understanding the consequence of the effort of investment that we make, because our responsibility is to manage 60% of our overall cost base, which is our people. What should we do as a consequence of the pivot point? If you're not one of those 1/3 of firms that are looking at the attributes of the leadership and top-tier talent, then perhaps you should begin. There should be a process of blueprinting. So I thought it would be useful by showing the business case and so forth in the document. That might be food for thought in your own thought process. There is clearly a plotting going on now around what is the workforce we want in the future, how do we get that talent to come to us, how do we get that talent to stay. There's a transformation underway. We already have the workforce of tomorrow in our business now. They're certainly within our industry if they're not in our own firm. And they may be across in lateral industries. I mean, technology may be seen as outside our own industry, but we are a technology industry as well. They are with us. It's about encouraging them to grow with us. So there's a transformation piece underway. There is that calibration piece, which I know we'll probably talk about more in a minute, but it's only the beginning. But I think it's clear that we have to recognize, without being led purely by numbers, that we have to have some. So there's a question now with leadership about what is the context of what we want to understand from a value of data. And then lastly, collaboration. It's clear to me, as much as it was to those 40 that I interviewed, that we have to look up and look around us in order to work together to build a better workforce. It isn't just purely about our own business, it's about the businesses that are in our industry. And it isn't just about how our industry performs from a balance sheet perspective, it's how we contribute to the wider society. and we have to work together.